They erased her name from the company she helped build. So she built an empire of her own, brick by brutal brick. This is the story of Madeline Whitmore, the daughter they dismissed, the sister they used, the woman they tried to silence. When her own family pushed her out of the business she carried on her back, she didn't beg for a seat at their table. She built her own. Loyalty, betrayal, quiet revenge, and a final twist that turned the legacy against its creators. What they didn't know was she had planned her escape all along. Your services are no longer required. The words echoed off the mahogany walls like the final gavel strike in a courtroom. Lana's voice, perfectly calm, perfectly rehearsed, cut through the sterile air of the boardroom as if it were reading from a script she'd been dying to perform for years. I didn't move. Not at first. I looked around the room instead. 12 board members, 6 on each side of the table, eyes shifting, fingers tightening around pens. Some avoided looking at me. A few, cowards, cloaked in custom suits, raised eyebrows, but no one spoke, not even Franklin Whitmore, my father, the founder of Whitmore and Stone Logistics, who wasn't physically present but whose absence roared louder than any voice in the room. His daughter, his firstborn, was being dismissed in front of the entire leadership team, and he hadn't even bothered to show up. Lana, on the other hand, sat at the head of the table, spine straight, blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear, that practiced smile stretching just wide enough to read as professionalism. But I knew better. I'd grown up watching her rehearse smiles in the mirror, perfecting charm like it was a weapon. Now she was using it. On me. "Clear your office by tomorrow," she added, already sliding a printed agenda across the table, as though my erasure was nothing more than a footnote between quarterly projections and lunch with stakeholders. I rose slowly, collecting my leather notebook and the black pen I'd used in every board meeting for the past decade. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I rounded the table. I nodded, polite but unreadable, to the men and women I had once called colleagues. None met my eyes. The door clicked shut behind me like the closing of a vault. Outside the boardroom, the air felt colder, sharper. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. Not yet. I simply walked down the corridor lined with portraits of past company founders and CEOs, men, all of them, and into my office. My corner space, earned, not given. Built on contracts, deals, midnight emails, and numbers that always added up in my favor. Natalie looked up from her desk the moment I walked in. "Well," she said, her voice catching. "What happened in there?" I didn't answer immediately. I closed the office door gently, then turned to face her. "Lana fired me," I said, effective immediately. Her mouth fell open. "She can't. You've brought in more than 70% of—" "She can," I said, interrupting, and she did. I sat down in the chair behind my desk and let the moment settle, let the shock wrap around me like a thin metallic fog, and then, just as quickly, I peeled it off. There wasn't time for grief. I opened the drawer on my left and pulled out a smooth black portfolio. Inside were 5 years of paperwork, signed contracts, legal filings, quietly built architecture for the day I had always known would come. VC Strategy Group, LLC, my consulting firm, my safety net. "Remember the restructuring I led 5 years ago?" I asked. Natalie nodded slowly. "Your LLC?" The same, the one that technically holds all the contracts." I met her eyes for the first time. "I think it's time my sister remembered who actually built this empire." The sun was just beginning to rise above the Nashville skyline as I stood in the silent hush of my office, staring out over the city I had helped carve a legacy into. For 15 years, I had been the quiet engine beneath Whitmore and Stone. Never the face, but always the force. And now, with a single sentence, Lana had tried to erase all of it. She had no idea what she'd just done. I turned back to my desk, fingers running across the embossed initials on the leather folder. VC Strategy Group. On paper, it was a consulting firm. In practice, it was the spine of the entire operation. 5 years ago, I'd grown tired of boardroom politics and whispers about legacy and optics. With the help of Grace Levinson, my attorney, and perhaps the only person who knew the full scope of what I'd built, I shifted all my major client contracts to the LLC. It had been pitched as an efficiency maneuver, allowing me to negotiate directly without departmental bottlenecks. The board, eager to capitalize on results, had signed off. None of them had ever read the fine print. Natalie hovered near the door, her voice softer now. Stunned. You planned this? I prepared, I corrected. There's a difference. I powered up my laptop, the familiar whir grounding me. My inbox was already stirring. One name flashed first. Beth Winters, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Skyline Distribution. One of our top 3 clients. Subject: change in point of contact. I clicked and read, Hi Valerie, just received an email from Lana Whitmore introducing herself as our new liaison. I'm confused. As far as I recall, our contract is directly with you and VC Strategy Group, correct? My lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. Correct, Beth. I typed. Let's hop on a call in an hour. I'll explain everything. That hour changed everything. By 8:15 a.m., I had spoken to Beth. By 8:30, to Thomas Graham at Evergreen. By 9 o'clock, my phone hadn't stopped buzzing. 4 clients, then 6, then 10, each one confused, each one loyal to me, not the company name on the building. At 9:12, Lana called. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Lana. Where are the client files? Her voice was brittle. Why is Beth Winters saying she won't work with us anymore? They're exactly where they've always been, I replied evenly. In the shared drive, organized by account. As for Beth, she's simply exercising her contractual rights. What the hell does that mean? It means you should read the contract headers, Lana. VC Strategy Group is the primary service provider. Whitmore and Stone is just the fulfillment partner. The silence on the line was long and sharp. You can't do this, she said finally, voice cracking. I leaned back in my chair, letting the morning light wash across my face. I already did, 5 years ago, with Dad's signature on every document. This is sabotage. No, this is structure. You wanted the title? You've got it. But the relationships, the revenue, those were never yours to take. The call ended with a tremble of air between us. No click, no goodbye, just absence. Moments later, Natalie returned with a cardboard box in her arms. I quit, she said simply. HR knows. I'm with you now, wherever this goes. I nodded, words catching somewhere between gratitude and resolved. We weren't leaving something behind. We were stepping into something we already built. I took one last look at the photos on the wall, the awards, the skyline. Let's go, I said. We've got a company to run. The morning after I left Whitmore and Stone for the last time, I arrived at the office 2 hours before sunrise. Not the corner office I had earned, but a warehouse-style co-working space on the southern edge of Nashville, still faint with the smell of paint and unsealed wood. The kind of place that made you feel like the only way forward was up. Natalie was already there, coffee in hand, her laptop open and a stack of client folders spread across a long communal table. They've already started reaching out, she said, without needing to explain who they were. I nodded, dropping my coat onto the back of a folding chair. Let's track them all. Prioritize the top-tier accounts. I want contact within 48 hours. My phone buzzed before I even finished the sentence. Thomas Graham, Evergreen Supply Chain. Morning, Thomas, I answered. You've been busy, he said, his tone laced with amusement and caution. You could say that. I heard what happened. Lana sent us a form email, said she's the new face of the partnership. But, Val, he paused, our contract's with you. What happens now? We proceed as usual, I said. All terms remain in effect. Fulfillment operations are covered. I'll send you the updated routing plans this afternoon. You've got infrastructure? He asked. Already? I glanced across the room to where Natalie was on the phone with one of our newly secured warehouse partners in Chattanooga. Yes, I said. Temporary agreements are in place, and we're negotiating for dedicated capacity. He exhaled. Hell of a move, Valerie. I'm in. I ended the call and added his name to the list. That was the 5th one today. By 10:30 a.m., Jordan Ellis walked through the door, 2 reusable coffee cups in hand and an expression that said more than words. I've got 6 people who want out, he said, sliding a folded paper across the table. Ops team, senior analysts. A warehouse supervisor. They'll walk the second you give the green light. I looked at the list. They were some of the best minds in our former company. The kind that didn't ask for attention, but always got results. People who had stayed because they believed in the system I'd built, until it collapsed under the weight of ambition and politics. You sure they're ready to burn that bridge? I asked. He smiled, tired but resolute. You already did. They're just following the smoke. Natalie turned her screen around, revealing an inbox overflowing with client inquiries and resignation confirmations. We need a comms plan, Val. Press will catch wind of this soon. We don't talk, I said. Not yet, not until we're operationally bulletproof. I don't want a victory parade. I want a clean transition. The warehouse echoed with the sounds of starting over, printers humming, keys tapping, coffee brewing on a portable machine in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't sleek, but it was ours. I stepped into the small, glass-walled conference room we'd claimed as my temporary office and stared at the whiteboard we'd scribbled on the night before. 17 client accounts, all high value, all with contracts, legally bound to VC Strategy Group. Lana thought she'd cut me loose. She had no idea I had already built the bridge and set fire to the land behind me. Just then my phone buzzed again. Lana. I let it ring, then ring again, and when the 3rd call came in, I finally picked up. You don't get to ignore me, she snapped. I didn't answer. Where's the rest of the client list? She demanded. Why is Thomas saying he won't deal with Whitmore and Stone anymore? What did you do? I leaned back, watching the names on the whiteboard. I did what you never learned to do, Lana. I planned, and then I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because the conversation was already over. The rest was execution. By noon, the warehouse no longer felt like a shell. There were charts taped to the walls, the hum of devices syncing to cloud servers, and voices, steady, purposeful, moving between desks. I wasn't just watching a team form, I was watching loyalty rematerialize, piece by piece, in a way that Whitmore and Stone could never replicate with titles or salaries. Jordan set up a call bridge with the 3 regional fulfillment centers I had scrambled to secure the night before. They weren't glamorous, one in Chattanooga, one just outside Louisville, and one in a town so small the zip code didn't even register in our old CRM, but they were ours, at least for now. And they were eager. We've got bandwidth, the facility manager in Chattanooga assured me over speaker. And after hearing how Whitmore's leadership handled the transition, we're more than happy to partner exclusively. Short-term or long. Short-term for now, I replied. But if things go the way I intend, we'll be in this together for the long run. Natalie passed me a fresh list. 3 more client reps had emailed, each asking for confirmation of their status with VC Strategy Group. I scanned the names, mid-size accounts but reliable. Clients who paid on time, gave honest feedback, and respected our operational transparency. Every name was a thread back to years of conversations, crisis calls, 4 a.m. fire drills. None of it had been glamour. It had been work, steady, hard-earned trust, and Lana had assumed they would follow a logo. She never understood that relationships are not transferable. A new name appeared in my inbox. Emily Rivera, our former tech systems analyst, brilliant, quiet, overlooked, subject, available if needed. Below that, 2 lines. I don't do politics, but I believe in your architecture. Let me know if you want help rebuilding it. I looked up at Natalie. Start drawing up offer letters. Use the old salary bands, but with bonuses. Loyalty deserves interest. She grinned. Already ahead of you. Just as I began to draft a response to Emily, Lana's name flashed across my screen again. This time, subject, emergency board meeting, 8 a.m. tomorrow. Message, your presence is required. The board demands an explanation regarding the client exodus and your legal positioning. We expect cooperation. I didn't even finish reading it before forwarding it to Grace. Me, you'll attend in my place. Grace, I'll bring the original documents, client rosters, and that very enlightening clause on fulfillment rights. I assume we're not negotiating? Me, we're demonstrating. I closed the thread and stared at the massive whiteboard again. It wasn't the numbers that struck me, it was the shape, the lines connecting clients, contracts, fulfillment partners, and staff. The web wasn't tangled, it was methodical, clean, built to last. It had taken 5 years to stitch it together without detection. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because deep down, I'd always known the day would come when titles would be turned into weapons, and legacy would be used as a leash. The clock on the wall ticked past 3. I hadn't eaten. Neither had anyone else. Jordan walked over and handed me a protein bar and a smile. You ever gonna tell me why you did it this way? All in the background, no press, no drama. I unwrapped the bar slowly. Because quiet control, I said, is louder than any press release. And as I took the first bite, my phone buzzed one last time that day. A text from my father, Franklin Whitmore. We need to talk. Privately, I didn't reply. Some conversations needed silence more than answers, and others could wait until the boardroom caught up to the battlefield. The conference room was in a downtown hotel, 10 floors up and tucked behind a frosted glass wall meant to project privacy but failing to contain tension. I wasn't there, not in person. Grace Levinson, dressed in a navy suit and armed with a slim leather binder, sat in my place. I had chosen not to attend for the same reason I had built my empire quietly. I didn't need to be seen to be in control. The board members had arrived early. Lana, too. She stood by the coffee station, lips pressed into a thin line, her hair immaculate, her blouse tailored to perfection, but there was a tremor in her hand when she reached for the sugar packet. She stirred, didn't sip, and when Grace walked in, Lana didn't greet her. She just returned to her chair at the head of the table, my former seat, and waited. Grace opened the meeting without pleasantries. Ms. Whitmore will not be attending in person, she said coolly. However, I've been authorized to speak on her behalf and present all supporting documentation. A few murmurs. One board member, Harlan DuPont, always a stickler for old-school etiquette, leaned forward. We expected Valerie to be here. This matter demands transparency. Grace didn't flinch. Then let's begin with transparency. She opened the binder and slid several sets of documents forward. Contracts, amendments, emails with digital timestamps, all signed, all approved, all legal. Each of these, she continued, demonstrates that VC Strategy Group is the primary contracting party on over 80% of current client accounts. Whitmore and Stone is listed solely as a fulfillment partner, authorized but not contractual. These agreements are binding and were enacted under full board approval 5 years ago. Lana's voice cut through the room. This is legal sleight of hand. Valerie misled us. She concealed her intentions. Grace turned a page, slowly. With all due respect, Ms. Whitmore, the board signed these documents. If they fail to read them, that is not a concealment. It's negligence. That silenced the room. Outside the window, Nashville's skyline glinted under the cold morning sun. Inside, the board members flipped through documents, scanning with dawning clarity. Some flushed with embarrassment, others, those who had suspected but never questioned, looked relieved to have a villain to blame. "What exactly are you asking for?" someone finally asked Grace. She closed the binder. "Nothing. We're not asking. VC Strategy Group is operating independently, servicing the clients it legally represents. If Whitmore and Stone wishes to maintain fulfillment responsibilities, a formal agreement will be required. Under new terms." The room shifted. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was a buyback, a scramble to stay in the game after being played cleanly off the board. And just as the silence started to curdle into questions, the door opened. Franklin Whitmore walked in. He hadn't attended a board meeting in over a year, but today he came not in a tailored three-piece, but in a simple gray sweater and jeans, looking every bit the aging founder, trying to understand where it all went wrong. He didn't speak right away. He scanned the room, saw the documents, saw Lana, stone-faced, saw the empty chair where I would have sat. Then he looked at Grace and nodded once. "Let's talk about how we make this right." Grace didn't blink. "We're listening." Franklin lowered himself into the seat across from her, the only sound in the room the creak of the chair under his weight. He looked older now, not just in the way that time wears down a man, but in the way regret does. More bone than steel, more memory than presence. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he said, simply, "We underestimated her." Lana flinched, like she'd been struck. "Dad?" He held up a hand, slow and measured. "You wanted the title, Lana, and you got it, but you didn't earn it. Valerie did. We gave her every reason to prepare for war, and she had the discipline not to start one, until we drew first blood." The board shifted, unsure whether this was confession, concession, or coronation. Franklin leaned forward. "I won't sugarcoat this. We're bleeding. Clients are walking out the door. Reputation is fragile. And unless we find a path to cooperation, this company, my life's work, won't survive the next quarter." He looked back to Grace. "We want to propose a long-term partnership. VC Strategy Group is our official strategic logistics provider. 5-year commitment, minimum. Retainer, bonus structure, clean slate." Grace's response was crisp. "We'll review any offer, but be advised, Ms. Whitmore's current operations are scaling rapidly. She doesn't need a partnership. She needs terms worthy of one." Franklin gave a slight, tired smile. "She always did have the upper hand. I just never wanted to admit it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Give this to Valerie." Grace took it wordlessly. When she stood, the meeting effectively ended. Lana didn't look up. She stared straight ahead, jaw locked, fingers clenched beneath the polished surface of the table. The woman who had so easily dismissed her sister days ago now sat in the ruins of her own maneuver, surrounded by men who had once praised her for her poise, now quietly withdrawing their confidence. As Grace exited the room, the elevator doors opened just as she reached the lobby. Sunlight streamed in through the glass, catching the gold foil edge of the envelope in her hand. Back at her temporary office, I was pacing in front of a whiteboard when she walked in. "They folded," she said simply, handing me the envelope. I tore it open. Inside, a formal proposal from the board, printed and signed. The numbers were generous, more than I expected, and tucked behind it, on linen paper, was a note in my father's handwriting. "You outplayed us all. I should have made you CEO years ago." I stared at the words for a long moment, not out of sentiment, but because for the first time in my life, Franklin Whitmore had written something with my name at the center that wasn't a critique or a course correction. just recognition. Jordan entered with a spreadsheet in hand, stopped mid-stride when he saw the envelope in my hand. "That from them?" I nodded. "What do they want?" "To survive." He let out a low whistle, and Natalie, standing near the windows, arms crossed, asked quietly, "Are we going back?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the space we'd built in just 10 days. Repurposed desks, coffee cups without logos, whiteboards still smeared with yesterday's ideas. No family crest. No inheritance, no legacy carved by anyone else. "I'm not going back," I said finally, "but I'm willing to let them pay for a seat at my table." The decision was made. I had been fired in silence. Now they would work under my name, and my name was no longer just Whitmore. It was the brand they couldn't erase. The message came at midnight. No lawyers, just us, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Harper and Pine, no punctuation, no emotion. Just a location and a time, classic Lana, trying to make it sound like a request while still giving an order. I stared at the screen for a while, before locking the phone and turning back to the contract drafts on my desk. But the words wouldn't hold. Not after that message. By morning, the Nashville sky was overcast, bruised with the weight of a storm that hadn't yet decided if it would fall. Harper and Pine was a corner cafe, known more for its exposed brick and overpriced lattes than its privacy, which made the choice of venue even more pointed. Lana wanted to be seen, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. She was already there when I arrived, seated by the window, posture impeccable, hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. Her coat was folded neatly beside her, phone face down, smile rehearsed but flickering at the edges. There were faint lines around her eyes I didn't remember, the kind that came from restless nights and relentless denial. I sat across from her without a word. "I ordered you a black Americano," she said. "How thoughtful," I replied. A silence stretched between us, not awkward, just heavy, decades of things unsaid hanging in the air like steam from the untouched coffee. "I've been doing some thinking," she started, stirring her cup with a tiny silver spoon, though there was nothing in it to dissolve. "About the LLC, why you did it." I didn't respond. This wasn't confession. It was performance. "You never trusted us," she continued. "Not me, not Dad, not the board. You always needed a safety net." I met her gaze. "Trust is earned, Lana, not assumed because we share blood." She flinched just barely. "You always thought you were the only one hurt." "No," I said softly. "I just never expected to be hurt by my own family." She looked away, out the window, where a young couple walked by holding hands, laughing about something no one inside this cafe would ever know. "You don't know what it was like after you left," she said. "The board turned. Dad panicked. They all started asking questions I couldn't answer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the golden girl. I was just the one left holding the damage." "You were the one who lit the match," I said, voice even. "I just refused to burn quietly." The silence returned, sharper this time. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "Then why are we here?" Lana reached into her bag and slid a small black USB drive across the table. "You should hear what's on this. It's not an apology, and it won't change what happened, but maybe it'll make you understand." I didn't touch it. Not yet. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I think you deserve the truth," she said. Then, after a pause, "Even if it doesn't change anything," nodded once, slid the USB into my coat pocket. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, two women who had once shared a bedroom, a bloodline, and 1,000 expectations neither of us had asked for. And now all that remained was the distance we'd carved in order to survive each other. As I stood to leave, she said quietly, "I hated you for being better, but I think I hated myself more for needing you." I didn't answer. Some wounds speak louder when left open. Back at the office, I sat alone in the glass-walled conference room, the USB drive resting in the center of the table like a silent dare. The space around me buzzed softly with the rhythm of our growing team, keyboards clacking, printers humming, voices low but certain. The sound of building something real. Still, I hesitated. Lana had never given me anything without strings, but something in her eyes that morning, beneath the layers of defensiveness and decay, had carried a different weight. Not remorse, not quite, but maybe a kind of fatigue that only comes from holding too many lies for too long. I plugged the drive in. There were 3 folders. The first 2 were filled with dry financial records from 6 years ago, spreadsheets, ledger scans, nothing I hadn't already known or outgrown. But the 3rd folder was named Recordings. Inside, 1 audio file. I pressed play. At first, it was muffled. Voices in a room with poor acoustics, the soft thump of chairs shifting. Then I heard it clearly, my father's voice. "She's too unpredictable," Franklin Whitmore said. "Too ambitious. Clients love her, yes, but she doesn't understand control. She questions everything." A pause. Then Lana's voice. "She doesn't see the big picture. She never did. She just wants credit. She wants the truth," my father said, "and that's dangerous." Another voice, unfamiliar, male, possibly a board member. "So you're proposing we restructure without telling her?" "Exactly," my father said. "We position Lana as the visible face, the successor. Valerie can do the work, but we need the narrative. She's too sharp. If she knows she's being passed over, she'll leave, and she'll take the clients with her." Lana didn't object. She agreed. The audio ended there. The silence afterward wasn't heavy. It was surgical. I sat back in the chair, staring at nothing. I had suspected for years that I'd been boxed out on purpose, that my work had been used while my name was erased from every PowerPoint slide, every press release. But hearing it spoken aloud in their voices, with that calm, deliberate tone, was a different kind of betrayal. It hadn't been oversight. It had been orchestration. Natalie walked in, stopped short when she saw my face. "Val?" I turned the laptop toward her and hit play again. We listened together. She didn't say anything until the end. "You want me to forward this to Grace?" I shook my head. "Not yet." There was no need to weaponize it. Not now. Not when I was already standing on higher ground. But it wasn't going back in the drawer either. That, I said quietly, was the day they decided I was expendable. "And the day you started planning your escape," Natalie added. "No," I corrected. "That was the day I started building my future." Later that night, long after the office had emptied, I replayed the recording one more time. Alone this time. When it ended, I copied the file and sent it to one person. To Celia, Franklin Whitmore. Subject: "Thank you for your clarity." No body text, no signature, just silence. Let him sit in it. Let him remember what it sounded like to bury your own child future with a voice that never cracked. This wasn't revenge. This was reckoning, and it was just getting started. I hadn't opened a drawer in my apartment hallway in years. It was the kind of drawer everyone has. Miscellaneous keys, expired batteries, a few mismatched takeout menus. But buried under a worn manila folder labeled Archive 2017, I found it. My mother's notebook. It was small, leather-bound and fraying at the edges, with an elastic strap she used to wrap twice instead of once, always careful to tuck the end under cleanly. She had been like that. Orderly in a way that never drew attention, always behind the curtain. She died when I was 34. Cancer. Swift. Silent. Just like her. I hadn't read the notebook since the funeral, but now After hearing my father say I was too dangerous to inherit in a recording he never thought I'd hear, I opened it with a steadier hand than I expected. The first third was grocery lists, to-do reminders, a note about what brand of tea calmed her insomnia. But midway through, the handwriting shifted, sharper, more deliberate. A new header. The girls underneath were 2 columns. Lana. Valerie. Under my name she had written in blue ink, gifted. Keep score quietly. Will carry everything unless taught to let go. Under Lana's. Performer. Needs validation. Does not see danger coming until it's at her feet. I exhaled slowly, my chest tightening. It wasn't judgment. It was prophecy. That afternoon, I found Natalie at her desk, building a timeline on the wall with post-it notes and push pins. Each color-coded tag represented a client or contract. A few were connected by lines of red yarn. To the untrained eye, it might have looked paranoid. To me, it looked like evidence. "We found it," she said without turning around. "Found what?" She pointed to a thin file on the table behind her. Inside was a printed proposal I had submitted 6 years ago. The Ledger Initiative, a project designed to streamline our client contract model and shift key partnerships to a consulting framework, bypassing corporate bureaucracy. "I remember this," I said. "They buried it, said it was too aggressive." Natalie nodded. "Except they didn't bury it. They stripped your name and rebranded it under Lana's leadership a year later. The presentation deck had been altered, but not completely. On slide 17 in the lower right corner was my initials, BC, embedded in the master template, a remnant someone forgot to scrub. A breath left me like a punch to the ribs. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't been paranoid. They had taken my ideas, my work, and fed it through a prettier filter. "I have the original emails," Natalie said. "They're time-stamped." I ran my fingers over the edge of the paper. "I want to compile everything," I said. "Not to leak, not yet. Just to hold it in one place. Something about seeing it all at once makes it real." She nodded. "We'll call it the White Ledger. Something clean, quiet." Behind us, the printer began to hum. Jordan entered with a list of warehouse partners who were requesting exclusivity. VC Strategy Group was growing faster than I'd expected, faster than I'd planned, but not faster than I could manage. Still, something in my chest ached. Not anger, not revenge. Recognition. I had spent years wondering if I'd been wrong, if I'd exaggerated the betrayals, if I'd misread the signs. But the files told the truth. And the truth was enough. By nightfall, the conference room was blanketed in the soft buzz of halogen lights and a kind of sacred quiet that only surfaces when people are doing the work of unburying truth. Every wall was covered now. Contracts printed and pinned, highlighted, passages annotated in red, arrows drawn between the dates when my ideas were proposed and when they were repackaged under Lana's name. At the center of the table was a single binder labeled White Ledger. I flipped through it slowly, page by page. The first contract I had ever secured under VC Strategy Group, the original flowchart for the client migration plan. Emails I had sent with clear terms, carefully worded yet firm. Notes from meetings that had been transcribed by Natalie in her shorthand. And finally, dozens of calendar invites where I had been removed from distribution lists just days before major presentations. Jordan stepped in with 2 mugs of coffee, placed one beside me without speaking. He had become a kind of shadow lieutenant in all this, someone who never asked for explanations but always delivered what was needed. "You going to use it?" he asked. I looked at the binder, then at the wall of evidence. "Not yet." He took a seat across from me. "You know, I used to think you were cold," he said. "Too controlled, too calculated." I raised an eyebrow. He smiled. "Now I realize it's not coldness, it's clarity. You see the battlefield before anyone else does. I thought of my mother's handwriting. Will carry everything unless taught to let go. Maybe she had known I would need this level of detachment. That I'd have to stand on scorched earth and not flinch. Clarity's expensive, I said. It costs time, trust, sometimes your name. He nodded. Natalie returned from her desk with a small envelope in hand. This came in the mail, no return address. I took it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. Valerie, you win. The board has voted to move forward with the proposal. They are ready to formalize VC Strategy Group as our official partner. The irony isn't lost on me. We're paying for what we once discarded. Lana has agreed to step down, conditionally. She wants a conversation with you before it's announced. I know what I said. I know what I did. This is the closest I can get to undoing it. Dad. It was the first time in over 20 years he'd signed anything to me with that word. Not Franklin. Not F. Just Dad. The ache returned, sharper now. A mixture of grief, vindication, and a sadness that something so small, a name, a note, could still crack the armor I'd built. I folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of the white ledger. She wants to meet, I said aloud. Alone? Natalie asked. I nodded. That's the condition. You want me nearby? No, I said. This one. It's overdue. That night, as the last lights in the office dimmed, I stayed behind. I stood in front of the wall of evidence, not as a strategist, not as a founder, not even as a daughter, but as a woman who had survived the slow erosion of identity inside a house of glass smiles and closed doors, and now I was ready to walk back in. Not to make peace, but to tell the truth with every step I took. The sun had barely cleared the skyline when I pulled into the parking lot of the Whitmore estate for the first time in 6 months. The house looked exactly as it always had. White stone, black shutters, perfect symmetry. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't here as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as the woman they'd tried to erase. I was here as myself. Lana was waiting on the back patio, seated at the wrought iron table where our mother used to drink tea every morning. Her blouse was soft gray, hair tied back, makeup minimal. It was the most unguarded I'd seen her since we were teenagers. You came, she said. I said I would. She gestured to the seat across from her. I didn't sit. I don't know how to start, she admitted. I stood in silence, arms folded. The morning was cool, with a sharp breeze that lifted the edge of the linen tablecloth and made the old wind chimes by the hydrangeas clink softly, like glass breaking under water. I listened to the recording, I said. She winced, but nodded. I figured you would. I also found the original slides from the Ledger Initiative, the ones with my name in the master template. I didn't know they kept your initials, she murmured. I should have checked. That's what you're worried about? I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. That you forgot to erase me properly? No, she said quickly. That's not what I meant. I finally sat, slowly, letting the weight of it all settle into the air between us. You used to be better at lying, Lana. She looked at me with a kind of fragile defiance. You think I'm proud of what I did? That it was easy? I think it was easy enough that you didn't stop. She stared down at her hands, fingers twisted in the fabric of her skirt. He told me you'd leave anyway, that you were planning your exit, that you didn't care about the legacy. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him, she said, because it was easier than facing the truth, that I'd never earn what you had, that I didn't build anything, I just wore the crown. The silence between us stretched again, longer this time. I'm not here for an apology, I said. And I don't need your guilt. But I needed to hear you say it, out loud. That you knew." "I knew," she whispered. A gust of wind passed through, scattering a few dried leaves across the flagstone floor. For a moment it sounded like footsteps from the past, echoes of childhood arguments, slammed doors, dinner tables where silence was the sharpest sound. "Dad wants us to work together again," she said finally. "He thinks if I step aside and you take over, the company will survive." "He's not wrong," I said. She looked at me. "Would you do it? Come back? Be CEO?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I already was one, just not for the company that had stolen my name. I glanced toward the gates in the distance, where a courier van had just pulled up to the mailbox. I knew what it carried, a finalized version of the new partnership contract between Whitmore and Stone and VC Strategy Group. They would pay us, but they would never own me again. By the time I left the Whitmore estate, the morning had given way to a brittle afternoon sun that cast long, sharp shadows on the road back into the city. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back at the house with its rows of manicured hedges and window boxes full of blooms that had never touched my hands. That place had never been mine, not really. What I was building now, though, that was something no one could take from me. Back at the office, the new signage had just gone up. Whitmore Strategy Collective. No initials, no abbreviations, no hiding behind paperwork or LLC shells. My name, my choice, my company. Jordan met me in the lobby, where contractors were still vacuuming drywall dust from the last of the renovated conference rooms. "It's official," he said, holding out a manila envelope. "They signed." Inside were the final copies of the agreement with Whitmore and Stone, a 3-year exclusive partnership which would generate a logistics infrastructure, would manage all logistics infrastructure. We were their backbone now, and the numbers reflected that truth. I scanned the terms, then slid the papers back into the envelope. "Has the announcement gone out?" "Scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow," Jordan said. "Lana's supposed to read the memo herself to the full company. Let her." "She's not going to forgive you," he added carefully. "I'm not asking her to." I walked toward the glass doors that led into our new executive floor. The space smelled like cedar and fresh paint, still unfamiliar, still not lived in, but it would be. We had gone from 8 employees to 35 in less than 4 months. Contracts were rolling in from companies we used to compete for. Now they came directly to us. Natalie stood at my desk holding a slim envelope with no return address. She raised an eyebrow. "You're getting a lot of these lately." I opened it. A single folded page, handwritten. "You were never expendable. I was just afraid of being irrelevant. You deserve everything I was pretending to be." Lana. There was no flourish, no signature beyond her name. I slid the letter into the same drawer where I'd kept my mother's notebook, the one that had described Lana as a performer in need of validation, and me as someone who carried everything. Quietly, until it broke. I no longer carried anything for them. Later that evening, I stood by the tall windows of our new office, watching the lights of downtown flicker on one by one. Behind me, the walls bore framed contracts signed in my name, not my father's. Conference rooms were named after the clients who had stayed loyal, not the board members who once questioned my place at the table. The name on the building no longer belonged to a man who had silenced me. It belonged to me, not Valerie Connors, not VC Strategy Group, Madeline Whitmore. The name they tried to hide, now etched in steel above our doors, not as a symbol of revenge, but as a monument to survival. And as the city below carried on, unaware of how a woman they once called the Quiet One had rewritten the entire story, I turned off the light in my office. Tomorrow the press would call it a comeback. But the truth? It was always a beginning, just one they never saw coming. Thank you for watching The Name She Chose. This story was never just about contracts, boardrooms, or power plays. It was about a woman who was told over and over again that she didn't belong. A daughter who was erased from the narrative her family wrote. A sister who was treated like a placeholder. A visionary forced into silence because her brilliance didn't come with the right packaging, and yet she didn't break. She built. Madeline Whitmore didn't get her justice by begging for approval. She earned it by staying quiet when she had to and loud when it mattered. By turning betrayal into blueprint, rejection into strategy, and loss into legacy. To everyone watching this, especially the women who've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or written out of their own stories, this was for you. You are not too much. You are not too ambitious. You are exactly as powerful as they're afraid you are. And one day, like Madeline, you will walk into the room they thought you'd never enter, wearing your own name on your own terms. If this story moved you, share it. Tag someone who needs a reminder that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and that survival can be the greatest kind of success. And if you've ever been made to feel like the side character in your own life, it's time to rewrite that story. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing you.